Howdy y'all, my name is Nicholas McIntire. I am an epic fantasy author, and today, since we just survived Valentine's Day, I'm going to be talking to you about 10 romantic tropes, some of which I love, some of which I absolutely hate, and some that kind of fall into a gray area where they can be done really well. It just doesn't seem to happen that often. Obviously, all of the views shared in this video are purely subjective. These are things that I have come across as a lifelong reader, and things that really just either make my heart race or make me want to throw the book across the room, typically. So if you disagree or agree, please let me know in the comments below. So the first trope that I personally love is the star-crossed lovers trope. This can also fall into forbidden romance. It's basically anytime you have a city or civilization or two countries at war, whatever it is, and you've got two characters who are divided by some sort of arbitrary reason, magic power, geography, whatever you like. And they find each other sort of impossibly, and it ends up giving them both a reason to fight for a different kind of world. It allows the author to present a ton of world building and information about the two different factions these people come from without just info dumping a ton of text onto you. And everything can come across as a bit more dynamic. The conflict between the characters is much more natural because they're trying to learn who the other person is, where they're from, and how they think or why they believe the things they do, whatever it is. When it's done well, which honestly, typically this is one that most people seem to get right, their relationship allows you to color in the world that these two people inhabit, and it also creates a feeling of hope that, hey, maybe these two sides aren't so diametrically opposed to one another. Maybe people could learn to get along if these two people can. And that sort of creates a springboard for ramping up the stakes and the plots of your interactions with these characters. Also, additionally, it allows you to sort of turn the camera around so that instead of just focusing on how different these two people are, you could focus instead on the rest of the world, trying to understand them and build conflict into their relationship that way, and allow them to sort of fuse as one sort of narrative agent against, us versus the world, that sort of thing. And as long as it's not too preachy, that's usually very effective. The second trope on my list is friends to lovers. This can be very sweet when it's well done, and once again, it typically, I think, generally speaking, is. The great thing about this is you don't have to build them up from nothing, build their relationship up from nothing, because they have a shared history. They have memories. Maybe they grew up together as kids, but just never saw each other in a romantic capacity. And then as your plot kind of takes off and the conflicts in your world become more outlined and more concrete, they find themselves being pulled together, and voila, they realize, oh, I've been in love with this person the whole time. So you can, once again, do a lot of character shading without info dumping. You can really show instead of tell about who these people are, how others see them, how they're perceived, and even throw in, memories from a long time ago that cement the fact that, no, they're really like this. They're really a good person. And you can give specific examples of that as well. The only thing about this particular trope is you do have to be a little careful that you, don't have it happen way too fast, because then the reader doesn't really have a lot of tension built up internally. They're not begging to see these characters finally realize they're in love with each other, because they already are. In the first act, they figured this out really quickly, and it's like, well, okay, that was sort of a missed opportunity. You also don't want it to take too long, because if you're building that conflict within the reader and they're like, oh, I really just want this to happen, and you keep throwing, curveball after curveball at them to explain why, nope, not yet. After a while, your reader starts to get tired and they sort of start to get bored, and that can lead to them withdrawing from the story. So it is a balancing act of getting just the right amount of romantic tension between these people and between you and your reader so that they're excited, and when they finally get together, the reader feels like they won something, like it's a very satisfying moment for them because something they really wanted finally came to fruition. The next trope on this list is where two people on a quest, usually with more people, realize throughout the course of their journey and all the things they have to go through that they are falling in love with one another. Once again, for character development, this can be really, really helpful because you're seeing these two characters from each other's points of view, as well as the points of view of the other people in the party. This can be a lot of fun because if you get one character who confides in their friend that, oh, I think he's really hot, the friend can then sort of become a go-between and can look for ways to help them figure out how to tell each other how they really feel. You can really involve the rest of the party in this in a way that can be really fun and rewarding. Of course, you could also do it where one or multiple characters decide that these characters shouldn't be together, and that creates interpersonal conflict. But in general, this can be a really effective way. Basically, if you don't have a friends to lovers trope happening in your book, this is a way to sort of expedite some of that because they are creating memories and experiences together that aren't all about them falling in love. The fourth trope on this list is the second chance at love. So from the beginning of the story, or wherever they split apart, you can show both of them maturing and realizing that, hey, maybe the grass isn't greener on the other side. They can even be in other relationships that they ultimately find unsatisfying, and as a result, find their way back to one another. This is another one of those tropes that can be done really, really well, and I think often is. But the one major caveat to this is if they broke up because one character was physically abusive or sexually abusive or, massively betrayed the other, your readers probably aren't going to be super into the two of them getting back together. And I struggle to think of what you could do to make the abusive character somebody that the reader is once again rooting for. So as long as that's not generally what happened to break them up to begin with, I think everything else can be worked through and discussed, and you can build both characters back into the reader's good graces and then have them get together so that the reader once again feels like something really satisfying happened, like they, won something. So now we move on to the tropes that I really personally cannot stand, and the first one of those is easily solved misunderstandings. It is totally fine and reasonably normal to have your characters get into a fight because one misunderstood the parameters of their relationship, or they thought the other character was going to do one thing and they did another and they felt like they were lied to. That's totally fine. But what I'm talking about is where your two love interest characters are so bad at communication that everything that sort of happens in the book following their breaking up or fighting or whatever it is could have been completely solved by one healthy, normal conversation. So when there's a slight misunderstanding and that just snowballs into a bunch of crazy hijinks and everyone is mad at each other and all of these ridiculously over-the-top things happen, because these two people couldn't just sit down and talk, I want to throw the book across the room. Next is what I call romance of circumstance, and that is where two characters, it's almost always two, are locked together in a prison and they're the only humans and it's a bunch of poisonous mutants, or they're in an elevator and trying to escape before the building blows up. Whatever that is, they are completely reliant on the other person for physical and emotional security or safety, And from that, a relationship develops. I'm okay with this as long as that relationship isn't expected to be a happily ever after, let's get married, have kids, and never have anything happen to us ever again. And the reason I can't stand that is because typically when a relationship is formed through life-changing, life or death decisions and adrenaline and all of these things, and it's like, oh, the only other person who is going through this is right here. And so because we're dealing with so many high-stakes events so fast, obviously you're going to have feelings for that person, and things are going to happen. But those relationships don't typically last for more than a few weeks after the incident, when you take a long, hard look at one another and go, hey, we don't really have anything in common. And besides this one horrible experience that we both went through and survived, there's really not a whole lot of other things holding us together. They typically don't even know each other very well. And as long as the relationship isn't expected to go into happily ever after territory, then this can be fine. But there does need to be some sense of realism about how these relationships generally check out. The next trope is love triangles. Now, this has been done so poorly so many times that I know authors who just want to run screaming from the room when they see one. And that's typically because the way they're set up is that, there are two guys who fall in love with one girl and they're both fighting each other over her. And she ultimately seems to take a long time for her to pick one or the other. And honestly, oftentimes, both characters by that point have done so many dumb things and emotionally questionable things to get her to notice them that you really don't even want her to end up with either character. This can be done well. I don't see it almost ever, but typically when it is, if you have three characters, you have character A, B, and C, and character A is in love with character B is in love with character C is in love with character A. That can be really interesting, and all it takes to dissolve or decide that you're ready to move on is for one of those three characters to reciprocate that love back to the person in love with them. And you can do some fun things with the sort of odd man out, the one who doesn't get chosen. I've seen where they're obsessed with this person that they were in love with, but he's chosen somebody else, and they still want to be close to him, so they sort of hang around, and sometimes they fall on their sword to protect this person, even though they know they're never going to be loved back. It sort of depends on how pathetic you want that third person to be, but it can be done well. The next one that I unequivocally hate, no matter how it's done, is any instance of sexual abuse, sexual assault, rape, non-consensual sex, any of that, because it's completely unnecessary. Now, I have seen a lot of older, typically, authors say, well, it's based on the Middle Ages, and that's just how things were. It makes it more realistic. No, it doesn't. If you're writing a fantasy novel that takes place in another world, you are in complete control of that world's history, of how gender disparity is treated, if there is any. And the only reason that you would have sexual assault in that world is because you chose to put it there. There is never a situation that I've encountered, I've been doing this a long time, where that's the only means of making your character grow or giving them a troubled past or explaining away some sort of fear or mental issue that they have. There is always another way to do this. When I see authors include sexual assault and rape and that sort of thing, it just makes me think that they're really lazy, because it's completely unnecessary. Now, in my series, in the Arcanium Codex, I'm not going to say that there has never been a single rape in the history of this universe, because that's unlikely. Sexual assault and rape are typically almost always about power. They are not about sex. And there's always some massive asshole who's trying to demonstrate their power over another group or another person. But I am in complete control of whether I ever talk about it or especially depict it. And I know there are a ton of people in this world who have dealt with sexual assault, rape, what have you, in reality. And when they read fantasy for a means of escape, they don't particularly want to be reminded of an extremely traumatic event, especially when it is completely unnecessary. Okay, the ninth one I have to be a little careful about because you could argue that something like this happens in The Hunter's Gambit, but this is the prophecy or destiny commands that these two people be together. And the reason I have a hard time with this one is kind of going back to consent. It seems to like the universe is taking away the consent of these two people to want to be in a relationship. In my book, this is handled in that, yes, those words can be thrown around, but it is very explicitly stated that no magical prophecy or hand of fate move to push these people together. Everyone is there because of their own free will. When I see this done in other works, there's the consent issue, but also it seems to be traditionally done with people who don't really fit together, with characters who don't even seem to like each other most of the time, much less love one another, but hey, the prophecy said so, so here we are. I have yet to see this be done really well, or for any reason that I thought was helpful or useful. If you all have a different opinion or you've seen this done really well, let me know. But generally speaking, this sort of ends up being a shortcut that I think a lot of authors will take to avoid having to develop a proper relationship between their characters. They like both of them, so they're just like, hey, let's cram these two together and we'll say magic did it. The last one does not have to be a romantic trope. Technically, I kind of call it the hold my beer trope, and this is where you have a bunch of characters, or maybe even just two of them, in enemy territory. And you know they are surrounded by people who think they're the bad guys and want nothing to do with them unless they want to murder or imprison them. And that's the moment that one character, usually a man, and usually for some stupid reason like honor or pride, or he's painfully honest, whatever it is, he decides to take that moment to tell everyone around him who wants to kill him that this is who they are and here's why they're there, trying to change their society, and all of these just really problematic statements that are only going to get him and his friends, partner, whoever, either locked up or murdered. And then the next part of the story is usually the same guy trying to break these people out of jail or prevent them from being executed, that where they wouldn't have been in that position at all if he had just kept his mouth shut. I don't think that ever makes a character more endearing or feel more honorable, because they just come across as stupid. And that's not particularly sexy, and it's not something I really ever want to root for, is this person is so into their code of honor that they don't have any common sense. That's not a lot of fun to read. And then, especially when the next part of the story is just them trying to undo what they've just done because of their principles, it's really hard to root for that. All right, thank you so much for tuning in. Once again, my name is Nicholas McIntire. My debut novel, The Hunter's Gambit, is available on Amazon in Kindle and paperback formats. The other ebook formats and the hardback will be coming in the next few weeks. I post videos on Mondays. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. Tell me below if you agree with me or completely disagree, because I would love to have a conversation about the things that entice us to want to see romances and the things that drive us away. Hope you all have a great day, and I will see you soon.